Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. How is everybody doing out there? We have arrived to the month of June, and we are just a few weeks away from the middle of the year. And doesn't it feel like this year it has been hyper sped up? It has been blink and you miss it type of few months here. Um, I can't wrap around my head the idea of getting old, because you only feel this way when you get old. You only feel like time is moving way too fast when you're old. When you're young, I mean, time was just dragging. When you was in school, in high school, when you was a little kid. Oh, I can't wait. See, the thing is, and this is my theory. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know the ins and outs of it all, but this is just my Kevin Reed theory. My theory is, see, when you're a kid, you have a lot of goals. When you're younger, you have a lot of goals. I can't wait to get a car. I can't wait to get a job. I can't wait to move out. I can't wait to find a significant other. I can't wait to have kids. I can't wait to do this and that and go here and travel there and do this. And when you get to a certain age, you've accomplished most, if not all, of those can't waits. So now it's just like you're sitting around and there's really no goals left to accomplish. And you've reached basically a midlife crisis, which is what I'm going through. I guess this is what a midlife crisis is. And time is moving so fast. So now you spend most of your time sitting back and like, uh, man, what haven't I accomplished? What haven't I done yet? Time is running thin. You see a lot of people you grew up with are passing away. You know, people are passing away early in life. I just saw a couple of weeks ago when the actor Ray Stevenson, who's known for his works on Rome, the HBO TV show. He's also been in the MCU, in the Thor films, and upcoming, he's going to be on Ahsoka, the Disney Plus show. And he also most famously known for playing the Punisher in Punisher Warzone, which is a very underrated film. The movie wasn't so good, but I would say very underrated performance by him. He's probably the best Punisher we've seen on screen. But he died. He was 58 years old. That's young. That got people are starting to pass away younger and younger, and it's like you start thinking about your mortality more. But I'm going on this long rant, and all this has absolutely nothing to do with this show. Which adds to my point that I'm going through a midlife crisis. But it just amazed me how fast we got to June, because I still remember Christmas. I feel like Christmas was a couple of weeks ago, and here we are in June. But here's the reason why we're here today. Today, like I said, we just jumped into June, and June is Black Music Month. And I want to celebrate Black Music Month. We're gonna touch in on a few things concerning Black music throughout history. It's kind of weird, being as though just a week ago we lost a Black music icon. Well, music icon, period. Black aside, Tina Turner, the great Tina Turner, who passed away, and it's just ironic that we're going into this celebration of Black music throughout history this month that is dedicated to Black music, because Black music is not a genre, not in the sense of R&B and rock and classic rock and all that. There's no genre for Black music, because Black music touches every single genre. I don't care what genre you want to speak of, with the exception of maybe dubstep. But you could probably go back and say that Black artists had a hand in that as well. But black music has touched every form, every genre of music that has ever been listened to. And so we're gonna go through the history of black music, and we're gonna review a film that is centered around black music. It is a classic, in my humble opinion, maybe a cult classic, but a classic nonetheless. From the year 1991, the musical drama directed by and starring Robert Townsend, The Five Heartbeats. One of my favorite films growing up. I used to watch that movie over and over and over again when it came out. I absolutely loved The Five Heartbeats, and it was amazing coming from. Well, I'll get to it. I'll get to it when we talk about it because I could spill on about that forever. But first, before we get to The Five Heartbeats, let's go over some of the history of Black Music Month and how it came to be. June is African American Music Appreciation Month, and it was created by President Jimmy Carter in 1979. This month celebrates the African American musical influence that comprised an essential part of our nation's treasured cultural heritage. Formerly called National Black Music Month, this celebration of African American musical contributions is reestablished annually by presidential proclamation. Now, let's go through different genres that African Americans have created, inspired, and fostered throughout time. Starting off with sacred music, and sacred music, which includes spirituals and gospel music, illustrates the central role that music plays in African American spiritual and religious life. The earliest form of black musical expression in America, spirituals are based on Christian poems and hymns and merge with African music styles and American music forms. Spirituals were originally an oral tradition and imparted Christian values while also defining the hardships of slavery. Gospel music originated in the black churches and has become a global recognized genre in popular music. In its earliest manifestations, gospel music functioned as an internal religious and ceremonial practice during worship service. Now, gospel music is also marketed commercially and draws on contemporary sounds while still converting spiritual and religious views as well as ideas. Some artists that you may know or may not know, depending if you listen to gospel music, you have Kirk Franklin, Yolanda Adams, Shirley Caesar, the late great Mahalia Jackson, Melvin Sapp, James Cleveland, CeCe Winans, along with her brother BB, Aretha Franklin, Mary, John P. Key, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. It's gonna Johnny Cash at one time, even though this is Black Music Month, but I just wanted to give a little context. Um, so many, and throughout time. And so gospel music has been a huge part of music altogether, let alone just that genre of music. Because if you listen to a lot of songs today, there's a lot of samples, there's a lot of uh, uh, beats that go along with the gospel music. It just has that kind of hymn to it. You can clap to it like you in church. You know, you ever hear those songs that you just be shaking and moving like you at church or something? That's the effect gospel music has on people, and it can even make you think you can sing. if you if you listen to it long enough, you'll think you can carry those notes like some of those great singers I just listed. Moving on to folk music. African American folk music links back to African cultural traditions, stemming from field herders, chants, and game songs. Folk music burst with social commentary. Popular folk protest music spread in the 1960s, and its influence is still found within hip hop today. Some folk music artists that you may know of note, you have Nia Simone, Jimi Hendrix, Tracy Chapman, um, Blind Willie Johnson, and more. Folk music isn't a form of music that I've actually listened to, but I have listened to hip hop. So I know what hip hop can do, and I know the commentary behind that. So if hip hop was originated from folk music, I get it. I'm all on board with it. Moving on to another genre of music, the blues. The blues formed a foundation of contemporary American music. As did sacred and folk music, the blues also greatly influenced the cultural and social lives of African Americans. Geographically diverse incarnations of the blues arose in various regions, including the Mississippi Delta, Memphis, Chicago, South Texas. Um, each regional manifestation of the blues featured a unique sound and message depending on their region. Um, for example, Mississippi Delta blues illustrated the poverty of the region while celebrating its natural and cultural richness. Some popular artists out of the blues genre you may know, John Lee Hooker, um, Muddy Waters, uh, Bessie Smith, Big Mama Thornton, Ray Charles, Otis Redding, uh, Etta James. You have Nia Simone, Ma Rainey. There was a movie made about Ma Rainey, who she was played by Viola Davis. Uh, I think Chadwick Boseman was in that. Yeah, Chadwick Boseman was in that film as well. James Brown, Billie Holiday, Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Because this is a genre I know. This is a genre that I know very well. Um, my my dad introduced me to blues, and so I have always had a deep love for the blues. Moving on to military music, believe it or not, beginning with the Revolutionary War, African Americans have always held a significant role in the armed services military band tradition. Um, in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, African Americans served in the drum corps. Musicians that played in military bands during World War One and World War Two often incorporated modern musical styles such as jazz into their song selection. They also toured the United States and Europe, entertaining civilians and military audiences alike. And speaking of the military bands around that time using jazz music, there's a good transition to jazz. Jazz evolved from ragtime, an American style of instrumental music. Jazz first materialized in, you guessed it, the 504 New Orleans, and is often distinguished by African Americans' music innovation. Multiple forms of genre exist today, from the dance oriented music in the 1920s big band era to the experimental flair of modern avant-garde jazz. Jazz is a form of music that I'm just now starting to get into. Late in life, I really enjoy jazz, even though I listened to it throughout, my life, but I never was a jazz guy, so to speak. But I really enjoy listening to jazz now. Some of the popular artists out there, or throughout history, should I say, you have John Coltrane, Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, Etta Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Nia Simone, Dizzy Gillespie, Charles Parker, Duke Ellington, Otis Redding. You could throw Prince in there, if you will. Winston Marsalis, Langston Hughes, Ray Charles. It's so many. Jazz is one of the most popular forms of music, at least down here. I mean, being as though it originated here in New Orleans, and so the jazz is always a thing down here. Even though I didn't discover jazz until later in life. I ain't gonna say discovered, but got into it later in life. But something I didn't discover late in life, I know my whole life and been a fan of my whole life is rhythm and blues. Uh, the predecessor to soul music, R&B, is another stylistically diverse genre with roots in jazz, the blues, and gospel music. R&B helped spread African American culture and popularize the idea of racial integration on the airwaves and, believe it or not, in white society. Today's form of R&B combines soul and funk characteristics. R&B today, I'm gonna be upfront and honest. R&B today is not as good as it used to be. Actually, you can barely find any good R&B that is reminiscent to, I guess you could say, the era I grew up, 80s, 90s. But even listening to R&B from the 60s, 70s, in that era, R&B doesn't have that. There's a few artists that do still, I guess you can consider traditional R&B artists, but not so much as it used to be. I'm not the biggest fan of R&B. That's probably why I gravitated a little to jazz, in recent years. But I still like R&B. I still like some of the songs that come out, currently. But I'm not a big R&B follower like I was when I was younger. You know what I'm saying? And as far as the list of R&B artists throughout time, I don't think I have enough show for it. I mean, you can start with the queen of R&B, Mary J. Blige, Marvin Gaye, Usher, Beyonce, Whitney Houston, Alicia Keys, Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Mariah Carey, James Brown, Michael Jackson, Prince, Lionel Richie, Smokey Robinson, Al Green, Barry White, Patti LaBelle, Curtis Mayfield, Diana Ross, Shaka Khan, Erica Badu, even though he's persona non grata, R. Kelly, Tony Braxton, Isaac Hayes, Babyface, Keith Sweat. I mean, God, I don't have enough show. But R&B is, one of the staples in black music for the simple fact that it blends all the genres together. And that's what makes it such a premier genre when you discuss black music. But one genre that is, I guess you could say, a little diverse, depending on who you talk to concerning the formation of this genre of music. Some would say blacks created it. Others would say no, indeed. Uh, it depends on how you look at it, and that is rock and roll. Rock and roll music incorporate elements of all African American music genres and combines them with American pop and country music components. The genre was born in the 1950s and appealed to the rebellious yearning of American youth culture around that time. Whether you believe it or not, I mean, there's one individual who says that he created rock and roll, and that is none other than Little Richard. Uh, he was the father of rock and roll. I don't know, I wasn't there, but we can all agree that Little Richard was definitely one of the top rock and roll artists of all time. Also, some other black artists in the rock and roll genre, you can say Chuck Berry, Prince, Jimi Hendrix, Bo Diddley, Fat Domino, Tina Turner, Lenny Kravitz, Smokey Robinson, Howlin' Wolf, uh, John Lee Hooker, Bobby Womack, Frankie Lemon, uh, Bootsy Collins. I'm trying to think of, but that The list is massive. Whether you agree that blacks created rock and roll or not, we can all agree that blacks had a massive impact on said genre. Moving on to a genre that I think has no controversy on who created it or not, we all know that this was created by the African American community, and it is none other than hip hop and rap. Hip hop and rap is musical traditions formerly embedded in African American culture. Like jazz, hip hop has become a global phenomenon, and it is the driving force on developing mass media. Hip hop music spawned an entire cultural form, while rap remains a means for artists to voice opinions and share experiences regarding social and political issues. I mean, I don't even know where to start with this list of hip hop and rap artists throughout time. Where do I begin? You have LL Cool J, you know, Run DMC, Big Daddy Kane, Eric B. and Rakim. To be more, I guess you could say modern, you can go to the two brothers that we lost in the 90s, the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac. You know, you had NWA, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, um, Chuck D, Jay Z, Drake, Queen Latifah, Busta Rhymes, Nas. I mean, once again, I'll be here until next week trying to list all the names of all of the hip hop and rap artists that have influenced this genre of music. But to put a bow on it all, this list of musical styles merely scratched the surface. In addition to the genres previously detailed in this list, African American music and artists have also developed and influenced classical music traditions, country music, Western music, pop music, dance music, as well as disco, techno, and house, among other genres and styles. Millions of people around the globe listen to and are touched by music that carries elements of African American musical traditions. I guess the purpose of this show is to take off the stigma of black music. You know, when people hear the term black music, many assume that it's R&B or it's hip hop, you know, rap. But currently, which is currently the most popular genre of music in the United States, but it goes so much deeper than that, you know. I didn't mention punk rock, you know, reggae music, you know, stuff like that. It's so much, and then the hands that touch other genres, which I stated earlier, you know, with pop music and all that. There, it goes deeper than that, and black people have had an influence on music since the inception of music, and so it's worth the honor, and it needs to be celebrated. And I'm glad that Black History, or should I say, Black Music Month exists. You know, these little things are important. These little things are here for a reason, and it's to teach others. It's to teach our children, let our children know certain genres of music, certain artists of music. You know, my kids can't stand listening to the stuff I listen to because they feel it's old. You know what I'm saying? And I felt that way with my parents, even though my mom always listened to gospel music. But sometimes she'll get some Teddy Pendergrass in there. But it was more to just what I'm listening to, you know, and it helped me in my love of music growing up, and even now, you know, I listen to all genres of music. And so I hope that throughout this show, that maybe, just maybe, we can open our eyes to other genres of music. You know, and not all music is just violent, you know, the gangster rap that a lot of people associate with black music. No, 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 no. And it's not really gangster rap. All they're doing is telling a story. They're telling what they see because they have no other way to get that out. So they rap about it to the masses so you can know this is what's going on in our neighborhoods. But instead of taking that and like, oh wow, it's a real problem there. No, you look at it, or I'm not saying you who are listening. I'm pretty sure all y'all are good people, but there are certain people who will look at it and be like, oh, they're a bunch of animals and thugs and hooligans. You know, that's not the truth. It's not the truth. Not to say that those type of people don't exist, because they do, but it's a cry for help. It's truly a cry for help. So that's my analysis of and I don't even think that's a word I just said. But anyway, that's 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 what my description of rap music is. Uh it's not gangster, it's not glorifying violence. It's really to tell what's going on. It's a story. Now, there are some bad apples, like there are in every form of anything. There are some that are glorifying it. I'm not saying that that's not the truth, but the majority of it is not like that. It's really not like that. And I hope that we've gotten to a point. I don't know, when it was hot and heavy when I was a teenager, I would say mid 90s, it was so bad. With Snoop Dogg, politicians would buy the CDs and steamroll them in the middle of the street and stuff like that, denouncing the violence and all this here. It was a mess. They wouldn't sell certain artists CDs at Walmart or Kmart or whatever. I remember those times. I remember those times. And it was like, my God, man, whatever happened to freedom of expression? I mean, you go back and listen to some of that old, like, country western songs and stuff like that from a certain generation. It will blow your mind, the stuff you hear. But that was never scrutinized. But this was. And I don't think it was fair. I honestly don't think that was fair, because it wasn't what people made it out to be. I mean, look at Snoop Dogg now. Now he's doing shows with what's her name, Martha Stewart and stuff. you know, Now he's beloved by everybody. Everybody. Time heals all wounds. I suppose. But anyway, that's my little talk on black music. Let's get into our review, if you don't mind. Let's go back to 1991 and review a little film that came out that year from Robert Townsend, who is known as a comedian. Up to that point, I've seen Hollywood Shuffle, which was a funny little kind of a sketch comedy type of film, which was hilarious, by the way. But this type of material, I wasn't expecting from him. And in 1991, he gave us the musical drama, The Five Heartbeats, which he co wrote with Ken Ivory Wayans. Yes, the oldest of the Wayans brothers, who gave us In Living Color, A Low Down Dirty Shame, I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, and all those type of films and TV shows. Helped, they're good friends, so they co-wrote this film together. Starring in this film, you have Robert Townsend, Michael Wright, Leon, Harry Lennox, Tico Wells, Diane Carroll, and the list goes on and on. The premise to The Five Heartbeats is it's loosely based on the lives of several artists, such as the Dells, the Temptations, the Four Tops, Wilson Pickett, James Brown, Frankie Lerman, Sam Cooke, and many others. And it follows the 3-decade career of the rhythm and blues vocal group, The Five Heartbeats. The film depicts the rise and fall of the Motown-inspired soul act through the eyes of one of the Heartbeats, Donald Duck Matthews, who is played by Robert Townsend. This is a movie that when I watched it back in 91, 92, whenever it was, I watched it. I was just fascinated by this movie. It's something about it that just grabbed me. And it felt so authentic and real at the time. Um, Mainly because that's around the time when I was really getting into music, especially the history of music. And some of the groups that I listed earlier, that this particular group, the Five Heartbeats, are inspired by the Temptations, the Four Tops, all those type of groups I was into. It still is, but I was getting into around that time of my life. And knowing the history of them, what they had to go through, and some of the hurdles they had to jump over as a black act in the 50s, late 50s and 60s. Couldn't play at certain clubs, couldn't go um, to certain cities and things of that nature, dealing with racism, dealing with all these obstacles outside of the group and some inside the group, infighting between members of the group, and drug addiction and money and all this here money problems between the two, or not the two, but the individuals in the group, all that stuff that I was really starting to learn about. And it just so happened, coincidentally or ironically, or however you want to quantify it, this movie comes out and it depicts all of that. And this is what I admired about this movie so much. It wasn't a cookie cutter, oh, it's a group that's rising to the charts and all this here. No, it really dove into how this group started as nothing and rose to the, I guess you could say, the hottest act in America or whatever. And for all of that to crumble with all of the outside interference, involved with the group members, jealousy between the members, or the management and the record labels. And one of the things I admired, they depicted, which is a actual fact, um, during a point in time in history, that these black groups on their record labels or on their covers, album covers, uh, their pictures weren't on the cover. They would have white people on the cover to sell the records, because they wouldn't be able to sell it if they actually put their pictures on it. And these are facts. I remember, and it pains me to this day. Hurricane Katrina really wiped out my dad's album collection, the actual vinyl records. And I think he got those from my uncle. But well, at least most of them. And I remember seeing these album covers with these white people on the front of it. I'm like, why dad listening to these people? Why are you listening to these people? And I would listen to them, and I'm like, wait, no, that's not a white that's not white folks singing. And I remember listening to all that, And so I can attest to, yeah, that's just facts, this actually happened. And let's not forget the the epic little moments that happen in this movie that people still quote to this day. This is a very quotable film. And at least around the circles I travel in, everybody knows everybody knows nights like this, I wish raindrops would fall. But not just the song, but they know the part of the movie when Eddie Kane, played by Michael Wright, he this is after he got addicted to cocaine. He got kicked out the group, and he hides backstage or in the alley behind one of the stadiums or the auditoriums that the Five Heartbeats were playing at. And he's in the old little outfit that they used to wear at their shows, and he's just strung out, man. He just looks bad, bad, bad. And he does, oh, I still got it, I still got it. And he sees nights like this, I wish raindrops would fall. He was just off key, and I'm doing it a disjustice, but it's a disservice, really. But Michael Wright did an awesome job as Eddie Kane. Um, he was the character I think a lot of people who watched that film really gravitated to, not because he was the protagonist per se, but his story. His story was so tragic. You know what I'm saying? He was so talented. He was the lead vocalist in the group, and he just fell off, man. He got caught up with foolishness, and it was a heartbreaking story. It was very heartbreaking. No pun intended. With the heartbeats, but it was it was one of the most quotable lines or quotable verses from a movie that you ever gonna hear. Uh, the other performances in this film, I must say, were pretty good. Robert Townsend as Duck did a pretty decent job. Wasn't expecting a lot out of him, but he actually held it together to say he was the quote unquote lead of this movie. I mean, he is the director and writer as well. So, but what I admire about Robert Townsend, he wasn't the focal point. You know, yeah, he wrote and directed this, and it could have been easy for him to write and direct, well, at least write a character that was just all about me, to be the shining star in the film, but he really wasn't. And I admire that. Leon, as his brother JT, Leon has gone on and had an awesome career. He was in a Temptations movie, that TV miniseries. I think it was. It was either a miniseries or I think it was a miniseries, but he was in that. You know, and I always thought it was funny. He goes from the five heartbeats to the Temptations, where he basically playing a similar character, but whatever. He was good in the five heartbeats, so that's why they cast him in the Temptations, and he was good. Actually, he was better in the Temptations, to be honest with you. Um, as I said, Michael Wright as Eddie King, um, stole the movie. He stole the movie, and I honestly felt around that time, and this is 12, 13-year old Kevin Reed, I felt that this movie was criminally robbed. And I was going to save this commentary till the end of this review, but I can't help it because I'm talking about Michael Wright here. Michael Wright should have been nominated that year for his performance. I don't know if he would have won. I can't remember who was nominated and who ultimately won in 1991-92, but he should have been in consideration. I think this was the best performance of his career, because I can't think of another Michael Wright movie where I'd say, "Oh yeah, he was awesome in that." Even though I've seen him in other things and I thought he was good, but this is his breakout, standout role as Eddie King Jr. Tico Wells as Choir Boy was an interesting character for the simple fact, excuse me, he was a choir boy. You know, he literally was a choir boy who sung in his father's church, and you know, he in the beginning of the film, he'll go and perform with the group, but he had to be home at a certain time, you know. he was I always gravitated to that character because that was me. That was me. He was just uh, uh uh coming from a, you know, a religious family, a deeply religious family. And to be a part of this group and have to tour and be in hotel room to hotel, night to night, and have the women coming after you and all this here, night and day from what his normal life was. And we saw him diverge in the festivities, and you know, he didn't really turn into a crackhead or nothing like that, but he was into the women. You know, understandably so. Another standout in this film, probably one of the standouts, is the character of Big Red Davis, who is portrayed by Hawthorne James in this film. And he was this corrupt owner of this record label. And Big Red is probably one of the coldest villains in film. You know, when you think of villains in movies, your mind doesn't gravitate to the five heartbeats and Big Red. But Big Red is probably the most conniving villain, evil villain in film. And it was played so real and amazingly by Hawthorne James. It was a great performance as this villain, because this isn't a Marvel villain, you know, this isn't a comic book villain. This was just somebody who you may know. You know, this is somebody who may live in your house, may live on your block, who may be you. You know, this was a guy who just he had a ambition. He got what he wanted. Once he saw what he wanted, he went and got it. And my God, great performance. Diane Carroll um had an awesome performance along with uh, Chuck Patterson, who played her husband here, who were the Five Heartbeats manager. And once again, another story that was so thick. It was so much going on, but it wasn't like congested so much. It was so much of this story, you know, and it was real. Because if you look up the history of the Temptations, of the Four Tops, of the Dells, of all these groups, these black music groups that came up in the 50s and the 60s around that era, you can see that this is pretty accurate. You know, this movie is called The Five Heartbeats, but you can insert any of those groups' names in the title, and that's the story. It was so real. Now, the film is a little dated, and I'm not saying dated in the sense it is a period film, which it is, but dated in the sense that you can tell this is an early 90s movie. It just feels like a 90s film. You know, I don't see this being a test of time film in some sense. You know, in some sense. I still enjoyed the movie. I overall, I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies of that era. One of my favorite movies from uh, Robert Townsend. I think it is a well-made film that should have received more recognition that it initially got in 1991. I know around that time critics were mixed on it, but it was amazing. I thought it was a Oscar worthy, Academy Award nominee worthy film. I'm not saying it should have swept the Oscars, but it should have received more recognition that it initially got. This movie was made for $9 to $10 million, and it ended up grossing 8.7 million in its theatrical run. And uh, it's sad to see that, but you know, I think if you release this, make this movie in 2023 and release it now, it's I think it does better. I think it will be received a little better. Uh, this is the first studio film from Robert Townsend, and of course, the studio didn't have a lot of faith in him in this story, even though they did greenlight it, and the budget restrictions kind of hindered him in his quest to make this film. Initially, Robert Townsend wanted Denzel Washington to play Eddie King Jr., and he wanted Whitney Houston to play Baby Doll, his girlfriend. But Whitney Houston felt that the role was too small. That's why she passed on it. But he couldn't get Denzel Washington because of the budget. You know, they couldn't afford him. And that's why the role, I think, rightfully so, went to Michael Wright. The film also was not released overseas. This movie was strictly released in the United States, so it didn't make any money, you know, in other continents. And the reason being, the excuse given by the studio is that black films don't open well in other countries, which probably is true. But I mean, let's see. You know, you never know unless you try. You know what I'm saying? But it didn't it didn't work financially for them. But it did gain popularity in home media when it was released on DVD and video and stuff like that. So it grew an audience through there. Ultimately, the Five Heartbeats is what I would consider a cult classic. I think this is one of the best films depicting this era of black music, and I actually enjoy it. I still enjoy it. I enjoyed it when I watched it the other day, prepared for this show. I still was singing the songs during the musical numbers. I enjoyed this movie immensely, still do. The Five Heartbeats, which was released in 1991, directed by Robert Townsend, gets a letter grade of a B plus. I think it's one of the best movies uh in this era, in this genre of film. You know what I'm saying? These kind of semi autobiographical films. I really, really enjoyed the Five Heartbeats. So that's the show. We are celebrating this month, the month of June, and every June, Black Music Month or African American Music Month, however you want to label it. Just to put it in, just to clarify things, I call it Black Music Month because I don't subscribe to African American. That label, that just it doesn't work for me. If you hear me say African American, it's because I'm reading an article or something. I'm not I'm not giving my opinion there, but I'm gonna do a show on it one day and explain why. But I just don't subscribe to that, and I know a lot of people that don't now either. It's one of those things. When you know better, you do better. It's not a bad thing. It's not an insult to be called an African American. I'm not going that route. It's not that. It's just something with me. I just don't do it. So I call it Black Music Month. You may call it African American Music Month, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm just explaining that's why I call it Black Music Month. You may be confused when you look it up or something and you see African American Music Month or something like that, and get kind of confused or something by it. Like, no, Kevin said, nah, don't go there. Don't do that. But anywho's, yeah, man, in honor of Black Music Month, man, you know what to do all month long. Blast your black music throughout the neighborhoods, in your homes. No matter what genre of music it is, whether it's reggae, rock and roll, jazz, hip hop, R&B, blues, whatever it is, man, just blast it this month in honor of Black Music Month. And don't forget, if you haven't checked out the Five Heartbeats, you've never seen it, I highly recommend you watch this movie. It is a very, very good film to watch, and especially this month in honor of Black History Month. But I would like to know, how did you feel about this show? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on Twitter at KB Radio Network, and on other social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Don't forget, we're on YouTube as well, everybody. If you are currently on YouTube listening to the show, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. I greatly appreciate it, as well as all of you listening on podcast platforms. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever it is you're currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me today for this episode of Movie Goodness, as we explored life through cinema here in the month of June, Black Music Month. Hope you all have a good month, a good day, a good week, a good night, a good everything. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love one another. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.